Kei Tsukishima needs no introduction whatsoever. As one of the most beloved characters in Haikyuu's cast, the journey he goes through is thoroughly celebrated as one of the most gratifying, emotional, and inspiring in the story. Everyone, including myself in previous videos, talks about Tsukishima, and by this point, I feel like we're all well aware of the nuances and genius of his character arc. So today, I'm not going to bore you by talking about his amazing progression, his journey of learning to love and appreciate volleyball, or his eventual ability to strive past the suffering and sadness he associated with it due to his brother. Everyone knows about how amazing that aspect of his character is, and the story does a fantastic job at laying it all out there. Instead, I'm gonna talk about something a bit different with Tsuki, something coming from the perspective of a former athlete who really appreciates the type of personality and teammate he is. The elephant in the room here is that Tsuki isn't the easiest type of person to get along with. It takes no effort at all to reflect back on the series and find many instances where he was condescending, immature, petty, and all around difficult to deal with for multiple members of Karasuno. But the key distinction here is that there's a world of difference between someone being withdrawn and prickly in terms of personality, and that person actually having ill intent and trying to be genuinely mean-spirited. He constantly alludes to an aspect of Kageyama's king moniker that the latter is very sensitive about, but he doesn't do this because he's really trying to hurt Kageyama. He does it primarily because he is hurt himself and responds to those he views as superior to himself in the sport with even more bitterness and resentment than he does in most other cases, where he is simply just flippant and sarcastic a lot of the time. Now, of course, this doesn't absolve Tsuki of blame at all. Regardless of the reason or true intent, it is never okay to belittle others and insult them in ways that truly cut deep. However, I bring this up not to defend these acts, but to instead show where he's coming from and where his mental state is at, because being a teammate of his involves learning how to cut through all of the layers to see who he really is. Karasuno is more than willing to do that as they slowly chip away at his hard outer shell throughout the series, and they're rewarded excessively not just through their support helping him to make the leap and become a great player, but through him becoming a genuine friend when all is said and done. The end result is comfortably worth the effort here. But with all that said, none of it really strikes on why he's so valuable as a teammate in my opinion. And while his height, blocking skill, and analytical abilities are huge boons, the thing that speaks to me the most about him would actually have to be his general approach and energy, and how that contrasts with the rest of the personalities on the team. Tsuki stays on a very even keel and rarely ever goes too far in one direction or another. In matches, he doesn't get super excited except for a couple of very rare and legendary occasions. And looking at it from another perspective, he was the only player to not cry after losing to Seijo. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't care. People just have different ways of expressing themselves, and Karasuno come to understand that none of this behavior means that he doesn't care about volleyball or the team. And this approach can actually be a very beneficial thing, because when Karasuno gets these huge points or when his teammates make some sort of amazing play, it's true that he only mildly celebrates, or often doesn't even celebrate at all. But what's also true is that when they're in a rut or have their backs against the wall, he doesn't panic or get overtaken by adrenaline or emotions either.
少なくとも K は感覚で動くタイプとは真逆に位置する選手ですよ。あいつは自分の力を信じてない。培ってきた感覚も信じてない。うちの弟はね、がっかりするほど冷静なんです。信じるのは目の前の情報だけ。
He isn't idealistic, and he doesn't trust himself to pull off something exceptional, so he knows that he can only rely on quote-unquote regular plays, which helps him to see what's right in front of him. He's always calculating, always reading the game and seeing things clearly. As a result, he doesn't lose his cool, and combining that with his quieter personality is what makes him a truly awesome player to have on your side. As Tendo points out, he can be described as the normal guy, but that can be such a benefit. As someone who played sports and competed at a relatively high level, I can't tell you how valuable it is to have personalities like that on a team. He isn't a vocal leader, but if contrasted by louder, more powerful and exuberant players, he is invaluable. In the midst of all of the emotions and stimuli, he keeps everything steady and just focuses on what he needs to focus on. And through his ability to analyze, react, and think, he helps everyone around him to keep perspective. Through this, I think he's an extremely calming and therapeutic influence on the team, actually having a similar impact to Kita even if he goes about it in a nearly opposing way. You just know that with him on the court, there will always be logic and structure to the team's defensive foundation. And that is something that Daichi and Noya provide through their roles as well, but Suki's less vocal, more cerebral energy is needed just as much.
考え続けてください。カラスノの理性。
He eventually breaks out a bit and starts talking and planning more, yet the core of Tsukishima remains very reflective and quiet. But just because he keeps to himself a lot and isn't as outwardly communicative doesn't mean that he doesn't value others on the team, nor does it mean that he doesn't trust them. He very much appreciates the others as both people and teammates, and has full faith in their abilities and courage. He just tends to show this in very unique and indirect ways. And a great example of this is his role during Tanaka's moment against Inarizaki. In the middle of Tanaka's big struggles during which he could not find a way past the opposition's defense in any notable way, nor could he seem to impact the game in the manner that he usually does, we reach a moment where he shows his determination to call for the ball from Suki, who is in a position to set underhand for the last hit. This felt like the perfect time to set to Tanaka and help him get his momentum going, so everything pointed to Suki giving it to him. However, surprising everyone, he instead passes it to Asahi in the back row, who scores. Yet despite getting the point, on the surface this initially seems like a strange move from Suki, one that shows a complete lack of confidence in Tanaka that would just pile the anxiety on him and add to the downward spiral. But due to how insightful Suki is, it's actually the exact opposite of that. He passed to Asahi instead of Tanaka because with the set going down to the wire, he thought Asahi was the more favorable option. He was better positioned with respect to Inarizaki's block, and he was playing better than Tanaka. Simple. It's not as if Suki was oblivious to the fact that doing so would demoralize and badly affect the spirit of the average player. But as much as he calls himself that, Tanaka is not an average player. And Suki wasn't willing to disrespect him by going out of his way to give him special treatment, as if he needed it. He may not be as technically or physically immense as some of the others, but Tanaka's mental fortitude and ability to persevere are second to none. And Suki knew this and factored it into his decision to not pass to him because he knew that something like that wouldn't get him down, and that he would keep his head up. And he was right. Tanaka did let his spirit drop at first, but only for a few seconds before he galvanized himself again as Suki expected. So Suki wasn't being ignorant at all here. He just had full belief in Tanaka's mentality due to his experiences with him and showed confidence in his teammate in an indirect and roundabout yet nonetheless very true way. I don't actually think that there are many other players on Karasuno that would have made this decision. I think they may have gotten caught up in the moment and goal of trying to force Tanaka into getting back into the groove, without having the calmness and presence of mind to realize in the split second needed to make that decision that Asahi was likely the better choice for that specific instance and that Tanaka would be fine if he didn't get it. But regardless of whether or not you agree with that, this all shows a ton about Suki's ability to read the game and understand his teammates.
Tsukishima! さっき俺が呼んだのシカトしたな。
だって東根さんの方が決めてくれそうだなって思って。
なんでそんなにはっきり言うの？
田中さんこそその鬼メンタル怖いんですけど、へこむことないんですか？
いや、俺へこんでたよ。
いつ？
さっきへこんだよ、何秒か。落ちた後は登る以外に道はなし。
それが簡単じゃないって言ってんですよ。
And another instance of his great decision-making and understanding of his teammates occurs later on, again in the Inarizaki match, which despite being less flashy and emotional of a game for Suki than Shiratorizawa, is in my opinion just as vital in showing his growing commitment to both this sport and Karasuno. After struggling throughout the entire game with Suna's unbelievably dynamic spikes, and after seeing Hinata's breakthrough moment, Suki makes a decision to trust Hinata with something he's never really been trusted with before. Hinata had been put in positions where the ball would be funneled to him as a defensive last resort prior to this, but he had never been expected to genuinely receive the ball and was mainly used in the hopes that it would stay in play somehow, whether that be through a fluke, hitting his face, or whatever. But in this moment, Suki takes the initiative to hoist responsibility on Hinata because he knows that he can handle it, and he directs Suna's hit towards him with complete trust that he can receive a difficult hit again. Anyone in that stadium who knew anything about volleyball could tell that Hinata's receive wasn't a fluke due to how polished his technique and reading of the game was. But Suki was the first to act and use it as a genuine strategy to counter what had been a real thorn in their side, knowing that he couldn't do it all on his own. He had seen his own personal moment reflected in what Hinata experienced, and having felt the urge to continue and push himself immediately after first stopping Ushijima, he knew that Hinata was likely experiencing something similar and would be hungry for more. And more than anything, having seen his irrepressible desire and spirit, and having admired it in his own way, he completely trusted in Hinata's ability and dedication, putting everything on the line for him to make this receive in one of their biggest moments. And again, he was right. Suki is far more emotionally intelligent than he seems, and these scenarios help show that aside from his judgment often being spot on with regards to his confidence in his teammates, he just understands them as people extremely well. And that combines with his overall approach to make him such an intelligent, calming, and in this way, encouraging influence. After Yamaguchi's success against Seijo, he doesn't outwardly show his excitement because that isn't really him. But acknowledging that Yamaguchi worked harder than anyone on serves and that as such, this isn't a surprise, is his own way of showing pride and faith in his best friend. And Yamaguchi realizes this and understands, and that's why Suki's praise strikes the deepest. Likewise, his decision to continue using his snarky wisecracks on Kageyama when the latter was clearly exhausted during the Shiratorizawa match was his way of trying to normalize the situation to calm Kageyama down and keep him focused. He knew that he was struggling, and decided that introducing a sense of casual normalcy to the occasion would be best for both the team and his teammate to prevent panic. It's the smallest and subtlest little actions. A simple word or two of encouragement, a dive for a ball that he would have left earlier on in the series, a small gesture. These speak louder than anything. We have him grinning with Kageyama while preparing their defense, or yelling at Hinata to give his spike his all, or smiling after a great serve from Yamaguchi. These moments are easy to lose track of as we get invested in the intensity of the moment, but they are so indicative of his growth. And his teammates seeing his lower-key encouragement and realizing what it means helps them all to push forward in a different way. Through his sometimes unspoken confidence in them and his no-nonsense realism, he helps to empower those around him in a way different to Daichi, Noya, Suga, or Hinata. He is the moon, the tranquil, calm, and mellow analytical core of Karasuno. And without him, they'd be nowhere near as good or spirited as they are. But despite the amount of time I've spent to describe the ways in which his realism helps the team, it would be incredibly inaccurate to infer that he stays unambitious the entire time. Because he is a member of Karasuno, who are consistently evolving and completely uninterested in staying still. And so any player trying to keep their place would no doubt have to push themselves as well. And despite what would seem like indications to the contrary, Suki definitely wants to keep his place. So we see that ambitious spirit replicated in him as he begins to take risks and push himself in different ways, with his risky serve against Inarizaki leading to them getting the match point being a prime example, but with other little things such as him taking responsibility for the timing of the blocks being indications of this too. By now, he's gained enough confidence to continue to try new and riskier things as Nationals progress, which shows his extensive development and hints at the idea that maybe the likes of Hinata and Kageyama are not the only ones on Karasuno with that monstrous volleyball hunger inside of them. Maybe they just have it to the largest degree, and maybe it exudes from them more than the vast majority. But you can't look at Suki's trajectory and tell me that his ability and willingness to continue forward is not a similar sort of desire. He doesn't have the outward enthusiasm, energy, disposition, and out-of-this-world work ethic that the most exceptional monsters in the story have, but that doesn't mean that he can't relate to them, and thanks to him learning to love volleyball, he's a lot more similar to them in spirit than many would assume. And in combining his increasingly daring attitude with his low-key, calculating approach and distinct way of supporting his teammates, we have someone that brings something special to the court that no single other player in the series can replicate. Many thanks for watching.